Konami perhaps had its best run in 16-bit video games. There are countless successful games from the company, whether they are games with licensed characters, games that were continuations of famous series, or even games that Konami created, the result of creative minds that permeated the entire studio. Well, in a studio that gave birth to games like Tiny Toon Adventures, Rocket Knight Adventures, Super Castlevania 4 and Axlay, before producing a version of Contra for the Sega Genesis, only good things could come, and it really did. Contra, at that time, achieved the status of one of the greatest game series ever made. Alongside other company firecrackers, such as Castlevania, the series has always starred on Nintendo consoles, and this has happened since the 8-bit with Nintendo, and going through the Super Nintendo in the 16-bit. The Sega Genesis only received the first game in the series in 1994, with Contra, Hardcore, a kind of spin-off of the main series. But judging by what we saw coming out of that cartridge, the wait was worth it and exceeded all expectations. The game's story takes place 5 years after the events in Alien Wars, the Super Nintendo game. A terrorist group led by Colonel Bahamut has stolen an alien cell that had been recovered during the Alien War and intends to use it to create heavy weaponry. In place of the traditional Bill Riser and Lance Bean, a new team of 4 warriors was called in to solve the problem. Unlike its rival at the time, the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis Contra game allowed 2 players to choose between 4 different characters, and not only in appearance, but also in gameplay and the type of weapons each one carries. Each of them has different gameplay and can carry 4 different weapons, identified by the letters A, B, C or D, in addition to the bomb that explodes the entire screen. The A button is responsible for switching between the weapons collected, and if you press the control directional down, plus the jump button, all characters will slide, which is very useful for getting out of trouble. Plus, everyone can climb walls and shoot in 8 different directions. This all adds, in addition to variety, a very high replay factor. Here are the 4 selectables in the game and some particularities of each one. Ray-powered. In fact, Ray, the human warrior, is the most balanced of the 4. He has good weaponry, his weapons are great for any game situation. Ray still has the classic weapon from the original Contra, the spread gun, which releases a burst in 5 directions, making your life much easier, in addition to the homing missiles, an ideal weapon for those who still don't know much about the game. Sheena Itranzi. She is a somewhat balanced character with good weapons. What catches with Sheena is the slow firing of some weapons, which can harm the player in more tense situations. Additionally, her weaponry is noticeably weaker than Ray-powered's, being compensated for with a more effective slide. Brad Fong. Brad has the strongest arsenal in the game, but also the ones with the shortest range. Therefore, only choose this character if you are already well acquainted with the stages and with the bosses, as it is not easy to play with him. His power punch is great, but like his psychic blast, he only goes sideways, never up or down. Brownie. This tiny little robot is one of the most interesting characters to control. He does better than the others in many situations, despite his weaponry being considerably weaker. His Electro Yo-Yo, Weapon C, is by far his best weapon, as the cord stretches right up to enemies and destroys them almost instantly. It is one of the most appealing weapons to use on bosses, despite being slow. Brownie even has an extra double jump move and can glide through the air by pressing the jump button while in midair. In addition to the 4 playable characters, we have some others that make up the team of villains and Commander Doyle, who is responsible for the hardcore team and who passes the coordinates of each mission. Among the enemies, there is Deadeye Joe, who is the first enemy that is found at the beginning of the game, in addition to the main villain, Colonel Bahamut. But the whole game is full of crazy bosses, huge machines and all sorts of things and objects that can take a player's life. In fact, it's one of the most impressive games ever made, not just in the variety, but in the number of bosses, one more creative than the other. The gameplay also hides some very interesting details. It is possible, for example, to lock your character while shooting using the X button on the Sega Genesis 6-button controller. In traditional control, you have to hold the fire button and press the A button. This is an interesting feature when you want to stay fixed in a safe place while destroying an enemy or a vulnerable part of a boss. But that wasn't the only thing that the game looked for variety. Almost every stage had a fork, which took the character to different stages, so the game's story will unfold according to your choices, and for that reason the game has 6 different endings. This factor is still much remembered and praised to this day. Generally, divisions lead to easier or harder stages, but you'll have to play through them all to see all the endings that exist, as well as being able to enjoy all the game's content, such as lines of dialogue and different bosses. Much of the difficulty of this game is in completing the entire set of endings, and, I tell you from experience, this is one of the most difficult tasks you will find on the Sega Genesis. It really is quite difficult to accomplish this feat. Another factor that draws attention, this time to the eyes, is the look of Contra, Hardcore. The game is so well made, with such fluid animation and full of special effects that it is very commonly compared to Gunstar Heroes, which is another gem of the Sega Genesis, made by Treasure that, by the way, was assembled by former Konami employees, among other artists. The game is full of explosions, entire buildings falling, giant robots, gunfire everywhere and no slowdown. It seems that everything was really done with great care, taking advantage of all the graphical capabilities of the Mega Drive and even increasing other features that it could not perform naturally. One of the examples is the famous phase of the highway, in which a giant robot, at the end of the road, has been chasing us and trying to hit us, stretching its arms in a very impressive zoom-in and zoom-out effect for the time. The level layout is also worth mentioning. The producers sought to create a simple and functional design, because in addition to phases that are simple straight, we have variety such as the aforementioned highway phase, another climbing phase and many other phases, where we have to fly in vehicles armed to the teeth. Of course, many parts of this game are boss fights, which makes it full of epic and insane moments. The music in this game is also worthy of praise. All the compositions are great, based on techno-trance, which blends in very well with the chaotic action happening on screen. Sound effects are very clean and crystal clear, except for some voices, which were hoarse, which was a standard on the Sega Genesis, as unfortunately Sega's 16-bit video game didn't allow the transmission of clear voices through its sound chip. Even so, Contra, Hardcore is one of those games to play at full volume. Finally, if you are a fan of the franchise or if you simply like a good action game and are willing to face a great challenge, I highly recommend trying Contra, Hardcore. By today's gaming industry standards, he can even be considered cruel at times, but, at a time when difficulty was the standard in certain games and especially franchises like Contra, it is simply pleasant for you to learn from mistakes and advance, discovering in the race how to beat the bosses and more complicated stages of this great Sega Genesis classic. In summary, we can mention the game's stunning visuals, which is one of the best on the Mega Drive, the soundtrack that perfectly matches the game, the huge variety of characters and stages, the fact that it has multiple endings, which adds a very high replay factor, and the fact that the game is a lot of fun, despite having a very high difficulty. On the negative side, we can say that the stages could be bigger, because many times you enter the stage and it comes down to just one boss. Final score, 9.5. Curiosities about the game. Contra, Hardcore is called Probotector MD in Europe. The Japanese version features an energy bar and infinite continues, features that were removed from the American and European versions, making Contra, Hardcore one of the most difficult games in the series. At level 3, when you climb a wall, you will find a mysterious character who will challenge you to a fight. If accepted, note that the character will do the same moves as Simon Belmont, main character in the classic Castlevania series, also by Konami. This review was written by Cosmo and published on the Revolution Arena website.